Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my Demonology Shadowlands Warlock DPS guide. In it, we're going to be covering Soulbinds, Covenants, Conduits, Legendaries, single target talents, Mythic Plus talents, single target rotations, Mythic Plus rotations, and basically everything else you can possibly think of for Demonology Warlocks. Any weak ORS profiles or add-ons you see here, you can grab off my Twitch if you want to swing by, grab them, hang out, ask any questions anytime. So let's start off with some of the changes that Demonology has received from BFA heading into Shadowlands, and then get into some talent builds. So getting into the big changes for Demonology, Warlock, and Shadowlands, curses are back as far as generic abilities go. Exhaustion, Tongues, Weakness. Demonic Circle is now baseline. It has indeed been replaced by Howl of Terror in the 40 row. Awesome iconic returning ability, even though, well, spoilers ahead, are probably not going to use it a whole lot in PvE. It's still awesome to see it back. Finally, we have Fell Domination, also making its triumphant return. It reduces your pet summon time by 5.5 seconds, so it's basically instant cast. It's about 0.4-ish, depending on haste, and also makes it cost 0 soul shards, which is a big improvement. Like, it's a help, because it's a huge help, because let's be real, our pets die all the time. Moving on to the talents here. Nothing in this row. 25 row, Demonic Calling has been changed. Called Dreadstalkers now cost 2 fewer soul shards, so they're essentially instant cast if this procs for 0 soul shards. They're free. Now, there is anti-synergy here with Demonic Calling and Nether Portal. It's awkward, just like most of Demonology, but that's still... this talent is still a very strong choice in basically every scenario. Power Siphon has also been changed, so you still sacrifice 2 imps, you still get 2 charges of Demonic Core, but it increases those 2 Demon Bolt Demonic Core procs, their damage by 30%, which is an interesting change from where it was in BFA. While it was a cool talent, it's still the same CD as it was in BFA as well. It felt like it needed a bit more power, and I suppose that this change sort of makes it more competitive. We'll get to that more in a little bit here, though, talent-wise. Doom, I believe, has been changed. I'm pretty sure they buffed the damage on it. They removed the Summon Doomguard part of it, but that's literally been bugged since Legion beta and not working. I believe Legion, maybe BFA. It's been forever. It doesn't work. So that part is gone. Doom is still here. Still not going to be chosen, but hey, we'll get to that in a little bit again. 35 row here, Vile Fiend, Soul Strike from the Shadows. The only real change is that from the Shadows now says Dreadbite and not called Dreadstalkers. That might not seem like a big deal because your called Dreadstalkers actually cast Dreadbite, but it is. It works very well with one Conduit, Carnivorous Stalkers, which we'll get to in a little bit here. 40 row, basically the same. They did increase the radius on Shadow Fury by, if you take Dark Fury by 2 yards, not furry. I mean, there are furries and Night Fae. We'll get to that. But about a 2-yard extension on the radius of Shadow Fury here. Not incredibly impactful, but it is a tiny bit noticeable if you're playing with this for whatever reason. Howl of Terror, once again, is back, being an instant cast ability. Not the worst in the world. I don't believe we'll play it in PvE for the most part, but it's still there. 45 row, Felguard, Soul Conduit are the same. They have buffed the actual attack power of Inner Demons. However, it's still not a very good choice. 50 row, Sack Souls, Consumption, and Nether Portal. They also buff the attack power on Nether Portal, and pets now charge into combat when you are summoning them from the portal. Demonic Consumption has received a pretty big overhaul in Shadowlands. It no longer sacrifices your imps, and the actual raw damage amp that your Tyrant gets is no longer based off of your imp's remaining energy. It now siphons, 15% health from every single pet you have out. Your imps, your Dreadstalkers, your Vile Fiend if you're playing it, your main pet being your Tyrant or your Felguard, and your Grimoire Felguard if you're playing it. So this ability extends, it doesn't consume imps anymore. So it extends all the imps you have out now, which can lead to some pretty insane implosions, some pretty insane interactions with certain legendaries, and changes to Demonology's toolkit. It's solid. There's a lot to talk about with Demonic Consumption, though, which we'll get to in a minute here, talking about talents. And one of the other big changes here that I can't really show you, Imp health, how do I word this? Imp duration outside of combat has been increased from like 15 seconds or 20 or so to 40. This was changed in a very recent patch, or I guess very recent build, like a week ago on beta. It is a huge quality of life increase for Demonology, Warlocks, and Mythic Plus. It is a pretty substantial boost to their overall damage profile because chain pulling is one of Demonology's strengths, and depending what you're doing in your group or your key, seeing your imps expire felt really bad, but a double to their actual lifespan outside of combat is massive and does a lot for Demonology. Let's talk a little bit about single target talents for Demo. So when looking at single target talents for Demonology, in the 15 row here, you have the option of Dreadlash, Bile Scourge Bombers, and Demonic Strength. In my opinion, the hands down pick here is going to be Demonic Strength. A minute cooldown, unlike Bile Scourge Bombers, it costs no soul shards, and just does a lot of damage. A 400% increase to your Fellstorm. There are certain conduits and abilities that also increase your Felguard's main damage. Demonic Strength is going to be the go-to choice in the 15 row for single target talents. 25 row, your options are pretty much going to be Demonic Calling with the potential to play Power Siphon. Now, Calling is very strong. It's been played for all of BFA and is still a very, very strong option. Like I said, it's been buffed in Shadowlands. Power Siphon, to a similar extent, also has been buffed in Shadowlands. There are a handful of effects that increase Demon Bolt's damage, like the Necrolord Decimating Bolt ability, like the Balespider's Burning Core Legendary. Now, from what I can see, those effects are additive and not multiplicative. However, with the raw buffed Power Siphon, it definitely makes it more of a contender in single target. My money is personally still on Demonic Calling, but this is more or less going to be a sim thing, waiting to see what happens. I still feel that Calling is going to be the play here, even if, to a similar extent, like how Internal Combustion was to Reverse Entropy for Destruction. If Power Siphon is ahead by a very, very, very small amount, people are just going to play Demonic Calling, unless there's like points in a fight like Sludge Fist, for example, where you have a large damage amp, you can dump those bolts in that window. Just due to simplicity, what it does for the spec, giving you more mobility and I guess less shards spent, meaning more Hand of Gul'dan cast, more everything else. I'm going to give the nod here to Demonic Calling, but keep in mind Power Siphon could be the play with certain builds or covenants, things like that. 30 row here, Demon Skin, Rush, Dark Pact. I think Rush is the choice here in PvE. If you can't make good use of it for whatever reason, Dark Pact has been buffed tremendously in Shadowlands, and I think it's already pretty underplayed when it comes to progression and a lot of PvE in the first place, where you can't make good use of Rush. People often tend to gravitate towards like Demon Skin if you don't really have a great use for BR, like Ashvane or Blackwater Behemoth in BFA, for example. But Dark Pact, it was very good on Ashvane in similar fights, a lot better than Demon Skin was. So it's important to keep that in mind. But the 50% movement increase that BR brings is just insane and pretty much can be used in most scenarios. 35 row here, you have FTS from the Shadows, Soul Strike, Vile Fiend. You take Vile Fiend in this row. We'll explain more in a minute, but it's Vile Fiend. Moving on. 40 row, Dark Fury, Mortal Coil, Howl of Terror. Now, like I said, it's cool to see Howl of Terror back, but Mortal Coil being a 45-second cooldown and healing you for 20% of your health and being an in-cap if you need it at times, just really strong, and the de facto choice in this row, I feel. Once again, Demonic Circle was here instead of Howl of Terror, but it has now gone baseline. So you don't have the option of choosing, all right, well, do I want Circle or do I want Coil? Now it's just Coil, and the ability is insane. Between Coil, Health Pot, Hellstone, if you're playing Kyrian, the actual Vial of Serenity, Ending Resolve, and just Warlock's survivability as a whole, you bring a lot of sustainability to fights. 45 row, Soul Conduit, Inner Demons, Grimoire Felguard. You choose Grimoire Felguard here. Once again, we'll explain it on the next row. You go Grimoire Felguard, moving on with life. 50 row, Sack Souls, Consumption, Portal. You go Consumption. There is no reason to take Sacrifice Souls. It is so incredibly undertuned, it's not even funny at this point. Another Portal, even after being buffed a week ago and being buffed a few months ago, it still can't really, it's not anywhere near the power level of Demonic Consumption. Demonic Consumption draws health from all of your imps, your dogs, your main Felguard, your Grimoire Felguard, and your Summon Vile Fiend, which is one of the reasons why these talents are so strong together. It also extends your pets by 15 seconds, which gives Demonologies a really, really strong damage profile every 2 minutes. Now, I did say 2 minutes. Keep in mind, your Tyrant is a 1.5 minute cooldown, but guess what's a 2 minute cooldown? Your Grimoire Felguard. So, pretty much, Demonology becomes a 2 minute cooldown build because you're holding your Grimoire for your Tyrant in basically every scenario, single target wise, unless there's some weird burn window or something weird's going on. You're holding your Grimoire for your Tyrant, which makes things awkward, but the 15-second extension on your Grimoire and the extra health that it gives to your Tyrant through decon, it's just worth it. And also this brings a lot more mobility. With Portal, for example, you have to plant for 15 seconds and follow an awkward rotation of builder, spender, and it's on a 3 minute cooldown. This CD Demonic Consumption beats it in the first place. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown, essentially, and it's just better than your 3 minute cooldown. The tuning has been so off in this final row for years, and it's only getting worse in Shadowlands. So, Demonic Consumption is the play here. That's it. and you move on. Let's talk a bit about some Mythic Plus AoE talents for Demonology, because unlike single target, there are a handful of builds that you can play for AoE as Demonology. So looking at Demonology's AoE talents, in the 15 row here, your options starting off with the more generic build are going to be Bioscourge Bombers or Demonic Strength. Bombers cost 2 soul shards, but is on a 30-second cooldown comparatively to Demonic Strength being 1 minute, but not costing any shards. Biomars is a placed effect like this, very similar to Rain of Fire, similar to Vile Taint for Affliction. So the good thing about Bombers is technically you can get twice the value, because half a minute to a minute cooldown. The unfortunate thing is that if your tank pulls the mobs out of your Bombers or they're placed awkwardly or whatever, you're going to lose a bit of value. Demonic Strength is tied to your Felguard. So if you pop Strength and the tank starts kiting, your Felguard's going to chase those mobs while still spinning. So you're not going to really lose any value there. So this is more or less up to you. I've played with both over the course of alpha and beta. I'm probably going to stick with Demonic Strength for the most part here, but there are some dungeons potentially, like there are a few where I think Bombers could very well be a good choice here. And honestly, in the end, I wouldn't fault you for taking either. They're both solid single target, both solid AoE. Up to you, personal preference, but I'm going to go with Demonic Strength. 25 row here, single target ability, you play Demonic Calling, and you move on with life. 30 row, Demon Skin, Rush, Dark Pact. Once again, I'll take Rush here. In Mythic Plus, you're going to be using Rush more than you will Pact or Demon Skin, unless you're pushing higher end keys, like high-end content, and you need that short cooldown or the extra Soul Leech shield, more or less being Dark Pact, I feel here, to survive. But de facto, like mid-tier, even up like mid-higher key range, Burning Rush. 35 row, running this build, we're playing Summon Vile Fiend. I imagine you can probably guess why. Well, spoilers ahead, we're still playing Decon. 40 row, Coil. 45 row, Grimoire Felguard. And last row being Demonic Consumption. Once again, Decon is so incredibly strong for Demonology. It pigeonholes you in a sense into this build, just because not playing Grimoire or not playing Vile Fiend makes it so that like the health loss, meaning the power gain that your Tyrant doesn't have from these, is just too big. You might think that like Soul Conduit's better because more Hand of Gul'dan casts, more imps, more implosions, but having Grimoire Felguard being a large AoE cooldown and having it give that health to your Tyrant for consumption and the extension is just super strong. And this brings a lot more single target damage than Soul Conduit does comparatively with Tyrant with extension and all of that. Now, I'm going to say this other build is not really a strong single target as the build we just looked at. This build is more of a consistent like AoE trash based kind of build, but it also brings a bit to the table damage wise on bosses. It's not terrible. You're still playing Decon, and spoilers ahead, you can just choose Decon as your talent in this row here. At this current point in time, barring buffs and nerfs, just not even bother changing it for the rest of the expansion. It's just that much better than these two everywhere else. So this build though revolves around playing Dreadlash in the first row, Calling here, Royal Rush from the Shadows in the 35 row, Coil here, and Soul Conduit. There is a bit of, I guess, a bit of a reason. You can play Grimoire Felguard if you want with this build, I suppose. I lean more towards Soul Conduit after playing it for a while. Grimoire Felguard will give you a bit more like single target priority damage. It might even be a thing of like, okay, you play Felguard versus on Tyrannical Weeks, Soul Conduit on Fortified, but it's also a 2-minute cooldown, remember. So it means that your Tyrant becomes a 2-minute CD as well. The build is Dreadlash, Calling, FTS, Soul Conduit, and Demonic Consumption. Now, remember back to what I said about from the Shadows, it's changed so that it now says Dreadbite causes a target to take 20% additional Shadow Flame damage. Well, read Dreadlash here for me. When your Dreadstalkers Dreadbite, when they charge into battle, their Dreadbite now hits all enemies. So FTS, Dreadlash, it AoE's FTS. So every target takes 20% more increased Shadow Flame damage. The cool thing here, there's a conduit called Carnivorous Stalkers that gives you a chance, it gives your Dreadstalkers a chance to trigger an additional Dreadbite. It might not be a crazy high percent, it's 4.5, but you have 2 Dreadstalkers. They melee independently, so it's higher than it seems. The cool thing is, if that procs, you get another Dreadlash application, AoE-wise. So you get another FTS re-app, Dreadlash AoEs again. So every single mob will have 20% more damage taken from Shadow Flame, I guess, damage for 12 more seconds again. It reapplies. It's really strong because your Shadow Flame abilities are Implosion, Demon Bolt, and Hand of Gul'dan. Like, those abilities are pretty much the main part of your damage profile, right? In AoE. You're imploding. You're casting Hand of Gul'dan to spawn more imps. You're casting, Demon Bolt procs, which aren't as relevant, but even in single target, this application matters a bit. Demon Bolt is a decent bit of your damage single target. So min-maxing around those windows when trying to dump your demonic core procs, it's relevant. It's worth it. And also, hey, you're casting Dreadstalkers every 20 seconds, comparatively to Bombers every 30, or Demonic Strength every minute. And if you're playing Decon and get procs too, it makes it even better. Quite often, like I mentioned, the imp out of combat duration was increased from like 15 or so to 40 seconds, which is insane now. Quite often, and plus, one of the biggest issues with Demonology was that you kill a pack, you'd have imps ready to go for the next pack, and your tank would go AFK and you'll get a drink or whatever. Or you'd be sitting there waiting to pull. He's like, looking at the flowers or something, man. Like, pull. And he pulls, and all your resources are gone. Well, that's not going to happen anymore unless something really bad happens. The cool thing is, you can maintain 369 more imps depending how many you have when that pack is dying. Head to the next, just hit call Dreadstalkers, AoE or Dreadlash, so you get damage out, and FTS application, AoE, then go big Implosion. And that's a huge increase to our damage profile in Trash. This build, I feel, is the most consistent, where you're looking at, like, Trash Pulse in Mythic Plus. Once again, not as good like tyrannical boss-wise, but it's still not terrible. I've played with this build more lately than I have the Summon Vile Fiend, Grimoire Felgar, like this build here. I think Dreadlash, FTS, Soul Conduit, this build is probably the better one overall for Demonology in Mythic Plus, due to the changes, well, partially, due to the changes that were brought recently to our imps and their lifespan. So one of the cool things about Demonology is that it has 3 to 4 different legendaries, and they're all pretty good in certain settings. Some are pretty niche and narrow, but when they're good, they're very good. It didn't actually start off that way. Most of Demonology's legendaries were actually pretty subpar, but through a bit of tuning in the last month or month and a half or so of beta, things got a lot better. Starting off with number 1 here, Implosive Potential. Implosion grants 1% haste for 8 seconds for each imp imploded. When this hits at least 3 targets, instead you gain 5% haste for each imp imploded. So, number 1, remember that Decon is not consuming your imps anymore. It's actually extending them. So every minute and a half or 2 minutes, depending on the build you play, you can get a pretty big haste amp. You're probably looking at, like, I've had 25 plus imp implosions. You're looking at 125% bonus haste. Like, that's a bit excessive, but you can do it. And it only lasts for 8 seconds. But that's huge. That's insane. Now, single target wise, this is not the best. I mean, okay, imploding 25 imps single target, you're getting a 25% haste increase. That's still solid, but it's probably not going to happen as often. It's fine. This was changed about a month ago. It previously did not have the 1% part on this at all. It was just if you hit 3 or more targets, you got more haste. Meaning it was just a dead legendary in single target. Now, like I said, while the 1% haste might not be massive, it's something. This legendary is very solid in sustained AoE or Mythic Plus, depending on the build you're playing. Getting that haste amp every, I don't know, 12-ish seconds with your implosion cycles is really strong. Implosive Potential is one I definitely have my eye on early for Mythic Plus for Demonology. Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling. Each soul shard spent on Hand of Gul'dan increases the damage of your next called Dreadstalkers by 3%. This does increase Dreadlash damage. This does work decently with this build here. The thing is, it depends on how many Hand of Gul'dan cash you get between your called Dreadstalkers. Now, you can sort of make this work. It was around like I think like a 45 to 50-ish% buff on average when we were playing with it in Mythic Plus. It's not bad. It works well with this build. It'll work better with higher levels of haste because more haste, faster Shadow Bolt cast, faster Hand of Gul'dans, more Hand of Gul'dans for your next called Dreadstalkers, a larger damage amp. I like this effect, even though I think Forces of the Horned Nightmare could very well just be better playing this build, even with the synergy that Grim Inquisitors has with this. Not a bad legendary at all, but you'll probably only play this in the From the Shadows, Dreadlash, Carnivorous Stalkers, Dreadstalkers build. Forces of the Horned Nightmare. This legendary is solid. Its Hand of Gul'dan has a 15% chance to cast a second time on your target for free. So how this works, it will copy however many shards you put into the Hand of Gul'dan that procs this. If you put in 3, you get 3 imps. If you put 2 or 1 for whatever reason, you normally don't cast for 2 or 1, but if you do, you'll get 2 imps or 1 imp out of the replicated Hand of Gul'dan. It does indeed deal the same splash damage. It does get the same damage amp from the shadows. It's a solid all-around effect because you're casting Hand of Gul'dan single target, AoE. It's like your main spender for Demonology. So The effect is nice, it's solid, and when paired with a different conduit or a couple conduits, which we'll get to here in a minute, it makes Demonology feel a lot smoother, because at the same time, like, more hand and cooldown casts, more sustained AoE, but also more imps, which mean more chances for demonic core procs. It might not seem like it's that important or that impactful, but it actually is. If for whatever reason if you're wearing this and your tyrant setup and proc like 2 free hand and cooldowns, that's 6 extra imps to siphon life from for your demonic consumption. Now, while it might not seem like a whole lot, imps don't count for as much as like your dogs do or your Felguard. It's still something. The ceiling on this legendary is actually pretty high, in my opinion. Balespire's Burning Core is the 4th one here, the last Demonology like specific one. Shadow Bolt increases the damage of your Demon Bolt by 8 seconds, stacking 4 times, lasting 15 seconds. This effect was also changed in the same build as Implosive Potential. It used to be 25%, stacking up to 4 times, but there was no duration on it. Whenever you cast that Demon Bolt, whether it was, 1, 2, 3, or 4 stacks, it would consume the Balespire's Burning Core stacks, and you wouldn't have that damage amp anymore. It made gameplay with this legendary incredibly awkward and not really very rewarding. It was changed to a lesser amount, being 8%, so a max of 32, but it lasts 15 seconds now. So basically playing this in single target means that you have a permanent 32% damage amp to your Demon Bolt cast. Now, once again, Power Siphon, Demonic Core procs, Forces of the Horned Nightmare, more potential Demonic Core refunds. Also playing, okay, spoilers ahead, Born in Blood, the Conduit here. More potential Demonic Core charges. This legendary is actually very strong single target. I feel it's our best single target legendary at this current point in time. Balespire's Burning Core, if I'm looking at playing Demonology, for whatever reason, single target Nathria, this is the one that I would have my eye on to craft first for single target damage. Moving on to the more generic ones, not really applicable. Wilfred is not bad. So this was initially 0.3 seconds, not 0.6 for every shard you spend. The issue with Wilfred's, though, even I early on made a comparison to this to VOP Minor, like we have on live. The big deal with this is that if you're in combat permanently for like, a course of a minute and a half, this will get you at about, 15-ish% haste, about a minute 7, a minute 8 tyrant, depending on the build you're playing. The thing is, you have to be in combat that entire time. In Mythic Plus, you're not always in combat for a minute 8, or for a minute and a half. Even if you are, chances are high you're probably interrupting, reacting to mechanics, moving. You're not just standing there planting and casting over and over and over. So VOP Minor, like in BFA, guarantees you that minute and 8-second tyrant or whatever it is every single time, whether you're in combat or whether you're AFK. This is different. It requires you to be in combat. Now, it's not terrible for Demonology. It's okay. It's probably like B- tier. This is a very good Destro legendary. It's not very good for AF. It's okay for Demo. So if you were looking for like one generic overall legendary, this is not bad. If you're looking at like playing Destro like as your main spec and wanted to dabble in Demonology, I wouldn't fault you for crafting this first for using for Destro mostly. But if you're looking for like one generic like overall best legendary for Demo in Mythic Plus and single target, I feel that it's probably Relic of Demonic's Energy. This is a really strong legendary effect. It was changed like a month and a half ago. Damage done by you or your primary demon has a chance to grant the other one 15% increased damage for 15 seconds. So this is actually higher than what it is for AF and Destro. It's 10% damage increase for AF or Destro and 15 for Demonology. Now, as a Demonology Warlock, I don't have a damage breakdown here, but if I did, you yourself, the player, don't deal a tremendous amount of damage. It's normally like your Felguard, your Imps, your Dreadstalkers, the demons you summon, and those don't count as you. So it sort of makes sense as to why they buff the damage on this effect a bit higher. But the good thing is, once again, your Felguard deals a lot of damage. So looking at, like, for example, Demonic Strength, if you're playing Soul Strike for whatever reason, technically it's there. But Demonic Strength, it's a big damage cooldown. Actual Fellstorm, just his baseline damage is higher than your Imp or your Voidwalker will be. Also, on top of that legendary effect, you also have the Fel Commando Conduit that increases your Felguard's damage even more. So if you get, like, for example, a proc of Synergy, the legendary, at the right time, when your Tyrant's out, when you're Demonic Strengthing, or when you pop your Demonic Strength, you're going to deal a lot of damage. I feel that Synergy overall, summarizing its effects, Synergy is probably the best overall go-to legendary for Demo if you're only looking to craft one. It's good in single target. It's good in AoE, good in Mythic Plus. It's just solid all around. If you're looking at single target, I'd say Bale Spider's Burning Core is what you want to look at. If you're looking at like more or less Mythic Plus, you're probably looking at Implosion Potential or Forces of the Horned Nightmare, depending on what build you're playing. I really like how Forces plays with this build, with Born of Blood, the Conduit, but I wouldn't fault you for playing Implosion Potential either. This is also a very strong effect. So, in the end, it's up to you, depending on what you want to craft. Overall, single target and AoE, Mythic Plus, synergy. If you're single target, I'd say Bale Spider's Burning Core. Solid middle ground effects, maybe leaning more towards Mythic Plus, Horned Nightmare, and heavy AoE, Implosive Potential. Conduits for Demonology Warlocks are actually pretty interesting. Sort of like how our Legendaries are, we also have a lot of pretty strong Conduits in different settings. Starting off with Endurance, Accrued Vitality is not very impactful. Drain Life Healing is not, it's just really not that big. It's sort of situational and depends on what you're doing. It's probably stronger in PvP, not a huge fan in PvE. Resolute Barrier might be strong at higher levels, like higher ranks of his Conduit. At this current point in time, once again, not very impressed. Diabolic Bloodstone is the play here. Anyone that consumes your health stone infuses you with 10% leech for 6 seconds. This does indeed count if you use your own health stone. You'll get the leech yourself. Now, I want to emphasize it says your health stone, meaning that if you have multiple locks in the raid, popping, if they have other health stones down as well, and somebody pops theirs, you're not getting the leech cooldown. So TLDR, drop health stones every pull and remind people to take them. Finesse Conduit, Fell, Celerity, whatever this is. The cooldown of Fell Domination is reduced by 54 seconds. In the end, it's nice to have around our pet style all the time, and a 6-second summon feels absolutely terrible. So, not a bad idea. Kilrog's Cunning, this is the actual demonic circle. I have Kilrog Legendary, or I guess Conduit they brought out earlier. I don't really understand the usefulness of this. The speed increase is nice, but if your eye is not stealth, I can probably just place the circle myself for the most part on a boss fight. I guess the speed increase is there, but if it's going to pull the boss, it doesn't matter. It's really awkward to me. I don't know what the point. It's cool, but I don't think it'll see very much play. Shade of Terror, your fear effects can withstand 100% more damage for breaking. PvE, I don't think it's worth it. Just, you're not casting fear very often in PvE, and if you are, there's probably a class that can CC better than you. Demonic Momentum. This is actually a pretty big one, though. Demonic Circle Teleport increases movement speed by 30% for 5 seconds. This is a higher speed increase at higher ranks. This is very strong. Quite often, you're using your circle to either dodge mechanics, cheese mechanics, move out of mechanics, whatever, what have you. A 5-second speed increase is big, and 30% baseline is pretty massive. Keep in mind, Burning Rush is 50%. So now I don't know like exactly what fights this is going to be used on, but for the most part, you should be using your circle to some extent, basically every single fight. Even if you don't move very far on a patchwork-based fight, there's probably somewhere where you can make use of a speed increase. This is a very strong Finesse Conduit. I currently have this probably as the best, followed by Fell, Celerity, and these two are just, they're on their own. Looking at potencies, the big boys here. So we have 4 for Demonology, the first being Carnivorous Stalkers. Once again, this effect is very strong. Playing this build here from the Shadows, Dreadlash, because you can AoE your FTS. Getting reprocs means you get more FTS uptime. It's just strong. Just a good conduit. Once again, it was nerfed by a pretty substantial amount, but your dogs do melee independently, have like essentially a higher chance to actually proc this than it seems. I wouldn't really look at playing this a whole lot outside of the From the Shadows Dreadlash build, mostly being in Mythic Plus, unless there's some buffs to things. But when you do play this build, this conduit is a very, very big part of it. It is huge in this build. It basically holds this whole build together, even though it's a bit of RNG. Well, welcome to Demonology. Born of Blood. So this conduit, Hand of Gul'dan, has an X% chance to generate a charge of Demonic Core. A 23% chance at rank 6 or whatever is actually really high. So this reminds me a lot of this legendary, the Forces of Horned Nightmare, giving you a chance to get a second cast for free, getting a chance to get another demonic core like stack for free. It's always going to be good because you're always casting Hand of Gul'dan. You're casting it single target. You're casting it AoE. You're casting it basically everywhere. And hey, if the stars align, you can get 2 procs off of the legendary proc and playing this conduit too, from what I've heard. But it's just solid. Currently at lower levels of haste, Demonology feels really slow. But having all these demonic core procs, having these double Hand of Gul'dan cast, it makes the spec feel a lot better. And this also feeds some pretty big implosions in Mythic Plus, depending on what you're doing. The Fel Commando Conduit here. Your Felguard deals 10.5% more damage and takes 10.5% less damage. So this conduit is very strong. Very strong. Basically, once again, your Felguard, Demonic Strength, Fellstorm, the actual just baseline damage that it deals. It also has other effects like the Legendary, Demonic Synergy, that can increase its actual damage output. If it procs at the right time, and you're applying all the amp effects, you Demonic Strength, your burst damage on all those targets is going to be really, really strong. This is solid in single target. This is solid at AoE. This is solid basically everywhere, I feel. The final one we have here is Tyrant Soul. Now, this is interesting. It's pretty much Supreme Commander from BFA. This effect is good. It increases the damage of your demons for 15 seconds after your Tyrant expires, and you get a stack of Demonic Core. You don't get a raw intellect buff like Supreme Commander brought, but a damage amp 15 seconds to your demons is solid. The thing is, if you're in Mythic Plus, there are better options. Commando, Blood, Stalkers. If you're looking at a single target build, more like this, for example, well, you have a 2-minute Tyrant because you're Grimoire. So this Conduit's going to be really good every 2 minutes, pretty much. It's going to be good, I should say, every 2 minutes. Now, if the fight dies basically after your Tyrant expires or after this effect expires, awesome. Great timing. If the fight dies like, I don't know, like a minute after you catch your Tyrant, it's probably not going to be the best option. It's solid. I think it's going to be sort of kill time dependent, but it's one to keep your eye on single target. Depending where it sims, it could be more impressive than I think it is. But if I was looking at single target talents or conduits, I would look for these 4 here. I would look at Fel Commando, pretty much de facto go-to baseline conduit. Demonic Strength, Fellstorm, just the damage it deals is solid. It's a much larger portion of your damage comparatively to your Imp or your Fel Hunter, as Affliction or Destro. Single target, I'd look at Fel Commando, and honestly, probably being just Born in Blood here. The extra Demonic Core charges, more Imps, more Hand of Gul'dan cast. It just changed from there. And let's be real here, a 25% chance to proc it. It's not even the highest eye level right now. A 25% chance to proc an extra charge of Demonic Core is pretty strong. If you're looking at AoE talents or conduits, this is where it gets a little more interesting. You have Fel Commando, Born of Blood, and Carnivorous Stalkers. Technically, all 3 are pretty good Mythic Plus. I like Born of Blood with the actual dog build because of the extra shards you get, like this build here, because of the extra shards you get, meaning more Hand of Gul'dan cast, meaning more implosions, meaning more everything else. And this actual conduit with Soul Conduit, with the legendary that gives you double Hand of Gul'dan cast, you can get some massive implosions off. But at the same time, Carnivorous Stalkers is also pretty good because you're looking at your dogs, you're wanting your dogs to reproc Dreadlash and FTS. So the builds I've played most recently, like with the FTS Dreadlash builds, big implosions, have been Born of Blood and Carnivorous Stalkers. If I'm looking at playing more of a normal build like this here in Mythic Plus, I would play Born of Blood and Fel Commando. Fel Commando is still very good, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't necessarily fault you for playing Fel Commando over like Born of Blood, playing the dog build like this. It's just that, well, the big implosions are solid. That's sort of what the actual spec is built around. So the cool thing is, as far as like Demonology Warlock based conduits go, you've got options pretty much everywhere. Briefly about the actual 4 Covenant ones. Soul Tithe, same thing if you're playing Kyrian. It increases your damage, your pet damage by 10% for 10 seconds. It's okay, nothing to write home about. It's not bad. You can make use of the effect. It's not terrible. Unlike Catastrophic Origin, which is terrible. The damage on IC is so incredibly bad right now. It's sad, but it's so incredibly bad because of the nerf they did to it. They swung the nerf bat way too hard. You can't even... We played Affliction with Venthyr a week ago, and the damage, even with Dark Lair and Dot Extension, was just not good. This Conduit is not very good. The actual curse increase and damage over time effect being increased is nice, but it's not going to amount to much. This, unfortunately, also is very bad. Dismantling bolts and missiles don't matter much. Even if they do, they're single target based, so it's not really that big of a deal. Soul Eater for Night Phase, interesting. Soul Rot's damage and radius increased by 25%. The radius, for the most part, is not a huge deal, but the 25% damage increase actually is. Keep in mind, that Soul Rot deals twice the damage to your main target as it does the other 3 surrounding targets. So this is not a terrible option. AoE wise, I think you have better options single target for Demo, but it's something to keep in mind depending on what you're doing. For the most part, though, I think these are probably going to make up the vast majority of your conduit combinations. Hey, it's not a bad thing. Demonology looks pretty good conduit wise. So starting off the Covenant talk here, if you're looking at being a Necrolord Demonology Warlock, you get the Decimating Bolt ability. Decimating Bolt launches missiles at a target that increases the damage of your next 3 Demon Bolts by 100% all the way up to 160%. The damage amp is increased the further, I guess, the lower health the target has. Basically, in Execute, you deal more damage, but it's not necessarily Execute. Basically, like, if it hits 0%, the max amp you get is 160. So for the most part, you can guesstimate that you're probably going to be somewhere around the 100 to 130 damage amp range. It's not bad, because looking at Demonology, there are a handful of abilities that actually increase Demon Bolt's damage. You have the legendary Balespider's Burning Core, you have Power Sight from the talent. Technically, you can even go as far as playing like Sack Souls or Inner Demons or Soul Conduit for more imps and things along those lines. From the Shadows, once again, Shadow Flame damage. Guess what Shadow Flame damage? Demon Bolt. So there's a lot of like interesting interactions here, but from what I can tell, in the testing that I did early on, it's additive and not multiplicative, which means that it's not necessarily as impactful as it seems. Now, we talked about Power Siphon being a potential talent choice in the 25 row here, playing a more single target build. The jury's still out on this, but if you're all about playing a big Demon Bolt damage amp build, Necrolord could very well be your choice. This is probably, spoilers ahead, one of our strongest single target Covenant based abilities. And the Soulbinds you get really aren't that bad either. You have 2 real options here. Technically, you can use Plague Divisor, but many gets like lead by example early on. A baseline intellect increase, and I guess a bit of an increase for the rest of your group too. I mean, depending on, well, depending on certain group limitations, but for the most part, getting lead by example early on certainly is a strong effect. Gnashing Chompers is not bad technically either later on, but it's also affected or connected to an endurance conduit, not a potency conduit. You also have access to Bonesmith here. After landing 10 critical strikes, you gain 18% increased crit chance for 10 seconds. This may only occur once every minute, but this is still indeed a strong effect. Necrolord Soulbinds aren't terrible. They're certainly decent, and coupling that with the fact that Demonology's toolkit is built around mostly single target damage or stacked AoE cleave, in the raid looking at more single target damage, Decimating Bolt in Necrolord is a real contender for Demonology. So if you're looking at playing a Kyrian Warlock, Scouring Tithe is the ability that you get. It deals a bit of arcane damage instantly and then even more damage over 18 seconds. Now, if the target you're attacking dies with Scouring Tithe active on it, you generate 5 soul shards. If the target lives, it'll reset the actual cooldown of Scouring Tithe, which is 40 seconds whenever the dot expires. So it makes it essentially like a permanent maintenance dot for Demonology if you end up not killing the target. Now, unlike Destro and Affliction, Demonology can generate shards pretty quickly. You can see it coming off cooldown again right here. Refresh. By just casting Shadow Bolt. So comparatively to the other two specs, you could make a case for it being least impactful shard gen wise, or I guess less impactful than it is for Destro and Af. Now, the thing with Demonology is that there's not really a Covenant that works well for Demo. Kyrian Scouring Tithe works very well for Af because you can get extra Rapture damage off it because it counts as a dot towards Rapture. It's extended by your Dark Glare. Destruction can Havoc Scouring Tithe, and if one target dies with Scouring Tithe on it, you get the shards back. If the other doesn't, you get the cooldown and reset as well. So it's a lot more valuable in those scenarios. For Demonology, it's more or less a set it and forget it kind of dot that can get you shards at a certain point in time. You can leverage the shards relatively easily because you can dump them about as fast as you can build them, but it's okay for Demo. It's something incredibly impressive. Nothing to really write home about. As far as Soulbinds go, you have Pelagos here. Even though Pelagos is not necessarily as good for Demo as it is for Af and Destro, it's still good. You get combat meditation early on, and double potency, even though it's not as early as the Dreamweaver conduits, it's still fine. This also is post Let Go of the Past nerfs, FYI, in case you guys are curious. Kyrian is fine for Demonology. It's not great. It's not amazing. It's fine, but you'll see when we talk about the other few Covenants here, basically every Covenant for Demonology is, well, just fine. If you're interested in playing a Night Fae Demonology Warlock for whatever reason, the ability that you get is called Soul Rot. Basically, it puts a dot on a target and 3 surrounding enemies for 8 seconds. Over the course of that 8 seconds, if you choose to cast Drain Life, it will AoE onto all of those targets. This ability is really cool. Unfortunately, Drain Life doesn't hit for anything at all, and you don't even end up pressing the Drain Life button because it is a DPS loss. The cool thing about, well, I guess the cooler thing about the ability is that Soul Rot's actual damage is pretty relevant. The damage that you deal to your main target is twice as much as it will deal to the surrounding targets, but pound for pound, this is our strongest dot-based Covenant ability, between this being Soul Rot, Scouring Tithe from Kyrian, and Impending Catastrophe from Venthyr. The other cool thing about this is that it has a primary target like aspect built into it for the double damage it deals, but like I said, it also hits 3 other targets, so it has an AoE profile in a sense built into it as well. It's not bad. When it comes to Mythic Plus, if I was looking for an AoE ability, this is what I would go with over Venthyr. Venthyr is just, like I said, Impending Catastrophe is just not very good, and this having the overlap of being good single target, okay single target, being fine, and being fine, being good in Mythic Plus, I think it just puts you in a pretty good spot. And that's not even talking about the OP Soulbinds they have. Once again, it is currently November 21st at 6 in the morning. Dreamweaver still, her second potency conduit is still unlocked at Renown 13. This could very well change before launch. Keep that in mind. Even regardless of this though, there are a handful of really powerful Soulbind abilities that Night Fae just has in the first place. Dreamweaver's final ability here, Field of Blossoms, gives you a 12% haste increase for 10 seconds, essentially every minute, because it's whenever you cast Soul Rot, which is very strong. Haste is huge for Demonology, especially this early on when we don't have much, even though you won't get access to this until later Renown levels. It's really big. Kyrian also has Wild Hunt Tactics, which just basically says, hey, you deal 10% more than every other Warlock or player in the raid, comparatively for the first quarter of the fights. If ads are spawning, hey, it's even better. And Nia also has Growth Invigoration, which is, it's solid, but one of her big abilities here is also the Poison effect from what I've seen. Later on, when you're actually getting access to all these abilities, I'm curious to see what's going to end up being the top dog here for Night Fae. But early on, you really can't just look past the second Renown conduit, or second potency conduit on Dreamweaver. It's just very strong. And once again, Field of Blossoms is really good. The Night Fae Soulbinds are in a solid spot. Even though Soul Rot might not be as good, it's still a decent middle ground trait. Good in plus, let's say fine. Fine in plus, and fine in rating / Castle Nathria. If you're interested in playing the Venthyr Covenant as Demonology, well, I have some bad news for you. Venthyr, unfortunately, just like Affliction and Destruction, is not the best. It was nerfed by the actual, you get the Impending Catastrophe ability that deals impact damage and then spreads a dot to surrounding targets and puts a curse on them. The initial impact damage was nerfed by 80% a couple months ago, and the dot was nerfed by, I believe, about 50 or so. The damage it deals single target, which is where you play Demonology and at least Castle Nathria, is incredibly bland. It's just not good. It's very, very, very undertuned. Even when you come into like a Mythic Plus scenario, for example, yes, it does indeed cleave on multiple targets. It does give you a good AoE damage profile, and actually applying a curse to multiple targets is not a bad thing. There is a bit of utility there that you can say no other covenants bring. The thing is, damage wise, it's still lacking. It's so bad single target at this point in Sims, from what we've seen, it's not even worth pressing. Think of that, your main covenant ability not even being worth pressing in what your spec is built to do in raid. It's awkward. Mythic Plus, once again, like it's a relevant ability. The damage profile that it brings is relevant. Hopefully it gets a buff at some point to where it becomes even more powerful, but Demonology's toolkit as a whole is like pretty stacked AoE based. It's pretty strong when it comes to those things in the first place. So taking a few seconds off from building shards and casting Hand of Ghoullands and Implosions to put up a semi-subpar ability is probably not where you want to be, even with Mythic Plus being in mind, when looking at some other covenants that we have access to. I will say, to a similar extent, the actual Venthyr Soulbinds aren't incredibly impressive. Nagia has Thrill Seeker, which is not terrible. 20% haste is solid, and for 10 seconds, that's a pretty good bit. but there's not really a whole lot else here. Like, I mean, Theotar has technically Wasteland Propriety. I've never even read the actual name of it before. There are a handful of effects that aren't terrible. Like Draven has the actual crit increase or your versatility increase, or I guess int increase for you, and it's not nothing amazing. It's all okay. You have better Soulbinds with Night Fae and with Necrolord with Kyrian, and you also have better abilities with Night Fae and Necrolord and Kyrian. There's really just not much pointing me in the direction or making me want to play Venthyr outside of the aesthetics. And the aesthetics are awesome, but you know what's even cooler? Not riding the bench in Mythic cutting edge progression. So when it comes to summarizing the 4 covenants from best to worst, number 1 for Demonology Warlocks, I'm going to say, in my opinion, is Necrolord. Taking into account what Demonology's damage profile is built around, mostly being single target or stacked AoE, more single target based, Decimating Bolt with Demon Bolt's damage amp is pretty much just that. It might not be as strong as it was before with the actual execute damage amp and things, but it's still there. Number 2, I'm going to say, don't hate me for this, Night Fae. Night Fae is very close to number 3, okay, spoilers, Kyrian, but it just deals a bit more damage, AoE wise, well, I guess a decent bit more, because you can't Havoc Scouring Tithe. You can't get more value off of Scouring Tithe as you can as AF either, because it counts as a dot for Rapture. Demonology just puts up Scouring Tithe for Kyrian and sort of forgets about it. Cool, I mean, it's a single target dot. If the target dies, great, I get 5 shards back. But Demonology also builds shards the easiest by just casting Shadow Bolt, comparatively to multiple Incinerates and Conflagrates or Agony generating shards and shard sniping. It doesn't bring as much value to Demonology as the Soul Rot ability, I feel, for Night Fae does. The AoE damage is there. The single target damage is there, I guess, in a sense, if you want to play it for whatever reason. You're probably not even pressing Drain Life with Soul Rot, but that's just something in itself. The actual Pelago, or the actual Dreamweaver Soulbind as well, having a Renown 13, I believe, second potency conduit, if that lasts, is also solid. And the Field of Blossoms ability is good too. Night Fae just looks solid for Demonology locks. The actual haste increase as her final ability is good. It just beats out Kyrian slightly, I feel. Once again, number 3 being Kyrian. Tithe is fine. The issue with Demonology is that I just don't think there's no like synergies really, like AF has with Kyrian or Destro has with Kyrian. They're all just sort of there, and it's just like, okay, this is the best one for damage, I suppose, looking at what the toolkit does, and that's fine. Kyrian's just there. A dot you put up. Pelagos is fine. It's solid. Master Effect, okay. It's not bad. It's just not the best, or comparatively as good as it is for AF and Destro. Number 4, once again, sorry boys, I know you hate me for saying this. I like Venthyr as well, but it's Venthyr. Impending Catastrophe is just so incredibly bad single target right now. You don't even press it. AoE wise, it's not terrible. It's not amazing, but it's not like it's terrible. It does bring some utility with AoEing, weakness, or tongues, but for the most part, the damage is just not there, even in AoE. Like, Demonology's damage toolkit is also pretty centered around, like, stacked single target, or stacked AoE cleave with Implosion, with Strength, with Bombers, with Hand of Gul'dan, with Fellstorm. I see is a very similar profile, but just not anywhere near as strong. You're probably still going to cast it in AoE, but I'm just not incredibly impressed with it. And unfortunately, Venthyr doesn't really have very many good Soulbinds, in my opinion. And the actual conduit for the Covenant that it has is also subpar. So 1, Necrolord, 2, Night Fae, 3, Kyrian, and 4, unfortunately, I'm sorry, Venthyr. So looking at Demonology's single target opener here, playing Demonic Strength, Demonic Calling, Summon Vile Fiend, Grimoire Felguard, and Demonic Consumption, your opener, I guess you could say your opener and your cooldowns, being your Tyrant, are really based around, like we mentioned before, maximizing the amount of pets you have out, being your Grimoire Felguard, Vile Fiend, Dreadstalkers, and a certain amount of imps, depending on how many you can get out before your other pets start expiring. So now I'm saying I will say we're playing Kyrian here. If you're playing Kyrian, for the most part, just put up your Scouring Tithe, refresh it if it drops. Same with Night Fae for the most part. You're not going to drain life. Just put up your Night Fae dot every minute. When it comes back up, put it up again. If it's worth pressing as Venthyr, which you're waiting on for Sims, just press it and set it and forget it. If you're playing Necrolord and are using the Power Siphon talent for whatever reason, whether you are if you're a Necrolord playing Power Siphon, if it ends up being worthwhile, I've been holding my Siphon, which is a 30-second cooldown, for Decimating Bolt, which is a 45-second cooldown because of the damage amp and stacking and things like that. We're still waiting on Sims. No one knows if it's better to hold or not, but if you are, and if you end up playing a Necrolord in that, keep that in mind. The normal opener, playing this build here, you're going to start by pre-casting a Demon Bolt, which will put you to 5 shards. You will then go Grimoire Felguard, summon Vile Fiend, call Dreadstalkers, and typically I'll build to like 4-ish shards here, depending on my pet's remaining duration. We'll go 4. We'll go Hand of Gul'dan, Hand of Gul'dan again. I'll pop my Berserking, go summon Demonic Tyrant, and bam. See, I just barely caught my dogs there. My actual Grimoire Felguard and Vile Fiend is still cranking as well. I'll put up my Scouring Tithe now too. So you get the actual full benefit of their health siphon and the extension at the last millisecond. Now, obviously, with higher haste levels and things, you'll be able to potentially squeeze in another Shadow Bolt for, 5 total imps from your Hand of Gul'dan, something along those lines. It'll depend on your haste and how geared you are for things like that. But for the most part, that pretty much is the opener. Outside of that, Scouring Tithe falls here. I'll refresh. You're pretty much just casting spell like your dog's on cooldown. Cast your Vile Fiend on CD here. And besides that, it's basically just like 3 shards into a Hand of Gul'dan. If Dreadstalkers are off CD, cast them, get them back on CD. It's important to keep in mind that whenever you're called Dreadstalkers expire, you get 2 charges of Demonic Core back. So you want to make sure, depending on how many you have, if your dogs are coming off CD or expiring, you have like 4, to dump at least 2 of those to get them back. Now you have your actual Tyrant here in about 10-ish seconds. Like as I mentioned before, the big thing is that you want to hold your Tyrant for your Grimoire Felguard, which comes back around in 35 seconds. It does indeed make this major cooldown 2 minutes instead of 1, but the actual health, like power increase you get from the extra health on your Grimoire, the extension on your Grimoire, the damage increase, everything else, you hold your Vile Fiend here for it as well. It makes it worthwhile. It's unfortunate that it takes away that cool 1.5-minute profile and makes it 2, but in the long run, it's worth it. Let's talk a little bit about Demonology's AoE. So if you're looking at Demonology's AoE rotation, whether it's Mythic Plus or just heavy AoE settings in general, most of your damage is going to revolve around Implosion, which implodes all the active imps that you have and deals Shadow Flame damage. This ability is not target capped, and it deals the same damage to all 10 enemies hit by the Implosion within 8 yards. So as mentioned earlier, there are 2 builds you can play in Mythic Plus, or I guess AoE. One is Dreadlash, FTS, Soul Conduit, or Felguard, Consumption, and Demonic Calling. The other one is what we saw a few minutes ago, single target wise, playing Strength, Vile Fiend, Felguard, and Decon, which still gives you a lot of power behind your Tyrant, but Demonic Strength gains value in multi-target scenarios, and the same for Grimoire Felguard because it also spins and AoEs and all that stuff. So regardless of whatever build you're playing here, the Implosion rotation stays the same. The timing potentially changes a little bit depending on if you're playing Dreadlash, FTS, and Soul Conduit, but we'll get into that regardless. So disregarding whatever build you're playing, the Implosion rotation basically is either 2 waves of imps or 3 waves of imps. You go 3 waves of imps if you have Demonic Core procs. So what I'm saying here is, for example, let's say we're in combat, we're fighting a boss. Let's just start hitting the target here. Let's say we're in combat, we're hitting a boss, we're hitting a mob, we're at 5 shards. So if you don't have any Demonic Core procs and you want to set up an Implosion on multiple targets, you build the 5 shards, go Hand of Gul'dan, Shadow Bolt back to 3 shards, Hand of Gul'dan again, 1 spell to fill for them to spawn, and then Implosion. That is a 6 imp Implosion. If, for example, you have 2 Demonic Core procs like I do here, you build the 5 shards, and you will go 5 shards, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan, fill with a spell for imps to spawn, Implosion. That is a 9 imp Implosion. So it's either a 6 imp Implosion or a 9 imp based on your Demonic Core procs and everything else. If you're playing the Dreadlash from the Shadows build here, things get a bit different. Let's get in combat here and not drop these shards and everything. So we're probably going to lose these procs anyways, but that's fine. So without Soul Conduit being a thing, the rotation you just saw there with the 9 imp one, without any refunds, would have gone 5 shards, Hand Bolt to 4, Hand Bolt to 3, and then 1 final hand, imp spawn, Implosion. If you're playing FTS and Dreadlash though, this build is a bit different because once again, your Dreadlash applies the increased Shadow Flame damage taken debuff to every target that you hit, or every target that it hits. And Shadow Flame damage, that's Implosion. So Whether you're heading from one pack to the next or just trying to set up an implosion on, let's say, this pack here. Say we've been in combat for a while, we get a dog proc, we go hand, Shadowbolt hand, dogs, FTS and everything here. You can see it, every single mob, then you implode. So Implosion will deal 20% more damage on every single target. And that's the strength of the Dreadlash FTS build. It might not be a strong single target wise because you don't have like Grimoire Felguard, you don't have Vile Fiend, but it brings, in my opinion, the most consistent damage profile in Mythic Plus on trash packs, because every 20-ish seconds you're basically imploding. Your dogs are up, you can implode again, you have your FTS buff on all the mobs, you can implode, and if it procs again, if your carnivorous Dreadstalkers, Stalkers Conduit procs, it'll reapply from the shadows, giving you an even longer window to implode or get multiple implosions in. Now, it's not the end of the world if you implode outside of that window, if your hand is forced, but just know that you're losing value not having FTS active. Now, like I mentioned though, regardless of you playing the FTS Dreadlash build or the Demonic Strength Vile Fiend Grimoire Felguard build, Implosion, that Implosion rotation is still the main part of your AoE damage outside of the splash damage or passive cleave damage that Demonology brings to most encounters. The cool thing that we talked about earlier is that the changes to Decon, you're playing Decon regardless, it no longer consumes your imps, and instead it siphons some of their health, but it extends their actual lifespan by 15 seconds. So we talked about earlier that, hey, let me get, well, it's hard to show you here because the imps will be in combat permanently, but imps live for 40 seconds outside of combat. If you spawn if I cast Hand of Rule down on this target here and it died, let's say in a second, the imps I spawned would last about 35 seconds outside of combat, which is really crazy because it lets you bring, like, you know, imps from this pack, for example, into this next pack and go, you know, right into Call Dreadstalker's Implosion if you have enough active. But the other cool thing you can do with Demonology, let's get in combat here, is that you can pop your Tyrant with like 9 imps out and then use all those those imps you have there and the baleful shards you get back and everything for like a 20+ imp implosion. Let's see if we can set this up properly. So for the most part, we're rolling here. We have 6 imps out. There are refunds. So let's start casting here. Let's just cast dogs because, hey, whatever, it's fine. So we build here. We have 6 imps. We're gonna have like 9-ish out. We go hand into a Tyrant. They're about to expire here. We can probably catch them. There's extension. There are baleful shards right there. We go hand bolt, okay, I'm sorry, it's only a 20 imp, and you implode. Oh, look at my haste, it went from 18% to 136%. Let's cast some spells. 136% haste. Why is that? It's because we're playing the Implosion Legendary. So like every minute and a half, that's one of the better things about this build too, is that you can Tyrant every minute and a half. You don't have to wait until 2 minutes for your Grimoire Felguard. Every minute and a half, you can have that pretty insane Implosion damage profile. You jump from, you know, 20% haste to 125 or whatever. We can implode here, go from 18 to 71. You know, it only lasts 8 seconds, but you can gain a lot more haste comparatively to what you got with EP and BFA. This effect is pretty strong, and like this build I feel is one of if not the most consistent damage output builds that Demonology has for Mythic Plus or AoE based scenarios. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video gave you all a better understanding of just how Demonology Warlock looks heading into Shadowlands, Mythic Plus, and Castle Nathria alike. Now, as mentioned, Demonology's toolkit I feel is in a really good spot. The thing is, also as mentioned, you know, there's just a bit of an imbalance in the power levels of certain talents for Demonology, and well, really outside of those talents, you just don't really deal a whole lot of damage. The good thing is that if there was a simple aura modifier buff or buffs to a few abilities, Demonology would be in a much better spot. The single target toolkit is already there, and the Mythic Plus like stacked AoE Implosion toolkit is there as well. There's a lot of potential with Demonology, and even in its current form, it's not bad at all. It's just not as good as Affliction or Destra I feel currently heading into Castle Nathria, as at currently 12:57 in the morning on November 21st. However, that could all change tomorrow with hotfixes, so keep that in mind. Once again, any WeakORS profiles or add-ons you've seen here, you can indeed grab off my Twitch for free if you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime. Let me know what you guys think of this build of Demonology or builds of Demonology in the comment section below. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them there, and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you guys want to see more raw content, be sure to hit the subscribe button below, hit the like button while you're down there, and also feel free to check out my AF or Destro guides, which are already posted on the channel. Thanks again, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon. Peace.